Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about Steelheart, Book 1 in Brandon Sanderson's The Reckoner series. So, as usual, we're going to talk non-spoilery thoughts and opinions up front, and then we're going to move over to the spoiler section where we can talk in more detail. So, with that being said, remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and let's begin. So, Brandon Sanderson's Reckoner series often gets ignored by the fandom, probably because it's not in the Cosmere, but I think it's really, really good. And it's also young adult, so that's probably another reason why it kind of gets looked over, because some parts of it can be very YA, it can be very young adult. So, I can kind of understand if that's the reason why it kind of gets left out, but I think it's a really good series and it should be included in the great pantheon of all other Brandon Sanderson stuff. So let's talk about the first book in the series, Steelheart. So, Steelheart takes place in a world just like ours until one day a red star that became later known as Calamity rose in the sky. And sometime after the arrival of Calamity, people started getting abilities. They started getting superpowers. But the problem was everyone that got superpowers would be evil, and they later became known as epics. And over time these epics started to take over different parts of the country and basically try to rule different cities and stuff. And as more epics arose, different epics started fighting each other and basically left all these different cities as ruins. So the majority of the US is basically a desolate wasteland, except for some of these pockets that are being held by very strong epics, like in the city of New Chicago, formerly Chicago, where our main character lives. Steelheart, the ruler of New Chicago, he basically took over New Chicago in the beginning of all the superpower people showing up. So he's been ruling over New Chicago for a while. And David is now 18, and he first met Steelheart when he was 8. So when David was 8, him and his father went to a bank trying to get a loan because they were basically struggling. And, they're trying to live life, everyday life kind of things. And pretty much out of the blue, a epic named Death Point walks into the bank. And prior to this, David and his dad have always had conversations and arguments and stuff that whether or not good epics will ever come to be like true superheroes. David's dad has always felt that one day a good epic will show up. Somebody that has a good heart who received these powers will show up and actually start protecting people. So he's always had that faith in them. And when Death Point shows up, it's just another case of disappointment because this man named Death Point can literally point at people and disintegrate them into nothing but their bones. And he's just indiscriminately pointing at people in the bank and killing them. He kills a baby in the mother's arms, and she's just holding bones, and it's just literally terrifying. And after a security guard is killed, David's dad grabs his gun in an attempt to try to protect them. And before he can do anything with the gun, Steelheart shows up. And it's in this moment that David's dad thinks, yes, this is exactly what I've been waiting for. This is a good epic. He's here to save us and everything. And as Steelheart is talking to Death Point, you start to realize, no, he's not here to save anyone. He's here basically to say, get out of here. These are my people to rule and subjugate and all this kind of stuff. He's basically claiming his turf and wants to start a fight with Death Point to, secure his dominance. And Death Point goes to try to use his disintegration power on Steelheart, and it does nothing. So that means Death Point is functionally powerless against him. So Steelheart basically takes him out. David's dad tries to get a shot off at Death Point while Steelheart is there, but he misses and the bullet grazes Steelheart's cheek. So it's in that moment that David sees Steelheart bleed, and no one has ever seen him bleed or injured or anything. Every epic has a very unique and specific to them weakness, and no one knows what Steelheart's weakness is. So David knows that day when he saw this conflict goes down, that somewhere in his head is the information he needs to discover Steelheart's weakness. So after David's dad accidentally grazed Steelheart with the bullet, Steelheart took that as, an attack on him. And then the fact that somebody saw him bleed, saw him vulnerable, means that, basically no one can live. He doesn't want any witnesses to this event. So he takes David's dad gun and kills him with it. And that kind of becomes his signature, what he does. And because people have witnessed him get injured and stuff, so because people have witnessed him get injured and he desperately doesn't want any information that could possibly lead to his weakness get out, he kills everyone in the bank and transmutes the entire area into steel because that's one of his abilities. He has like super strength and flight and can turn things into steel, and he's like completely invulnerable. And so David, through a bunch of miracles and a lot of luck, he survives this situation. And then basically the story picks up from there 10 years later, where he's 18 and has been spending basically his entire life studying epics and trying to discover different weaknesses and stuff, because he's carried this vengeance and vendetta this entire time because of the death of his dad. So he wants to basically work to stop these evil epics and, hopefully try to get the world back to something similar to what it was 10 years prior. So so over the years of the Epic's rule, a group of humans, well-trained humans, basically came together and became known as the Reckoners. They actively hunt Epics and discover their weaknesses and try to kill them. And basically, they're the superhero force. It's very much like The Boys, and I kind of like it a lot. Mostly retroactively, because I read this series before I watched The Boys, before The Boys came out. And this is very much a more PG version of The Boys. Well, not even really PG because it gets pretty grim. So it's just not as hardcore as The Boys. But it's really good in that same direction, though. So David's goal is to join the Reckoners and become part of this group so he can actually help take out some of these epics and probably use their information and their knowledge to, plus his knowledge, to probably figure out what Steelheart's weakness actually is. And that's the goal of the entire story of this first book. So I want to start off by saying I really love the opening line for this story. Like the David basically says, "I saw Steelheart bleed." Like as an opening line, I think that's beautiful because it just triggers the mind with so much curiosity. You're like, "Who's Steelheart? Like, why is seeing him bleed a big deal? Like, why is that? Like, what does that mean? Like, why is it difficult for him to bleed? Like, what was the situation? Like, it triggers all this curiosity and it makes you really intrigued and you want to know more and you want to go into it. It reminds me a lot of Stephen King's opening line for The Gunslinger. Like, the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. Like, that's just intriguing in and of itself. Like, you want to know, like, the man in black, what does that mean? Like, the desert, what desert? Why is the gunslinger following? What is this dynamic? What is this story? So it just kind of triggers all this intrigue and this curiosity and stuff. And I think this story does exactly the same thing with this opening line. I think Brandon's most popular young adult series right now is Skyward, but this is actually really, really good. And the series is completed, which is, probably another reason why it doesn't really get talked about much. But I think this is a lot of fun. Like the main character, David, he's really interesting. He's got some of those, young adult fiction, angsty kind of trope things happening, but he kind of gets over a lot of that really easily. And he's so completely focused on his mission with these epics and things that a lot of the other hangups that I have, at least personally, with YA fiction, like just doesn't come about. Like there's a kind of a love situation he has with one of the members of the crew, but that's not even played up to an annoying degree. It's very much played straightforward and kind of real life, and there's no real like love triangle situation, so it doesn't get annoying in that way. It's done really well, and it's very kind of smooth and it's kind of low key in a lot of ways that it's done. But that might also be a negative for some people because a series like this could get very, very in depth and it could get very nuanced and you could play with a lot of concepts and themes in this world. But Brandon kind of just faces it as a straightforward story where the humans are the good guys and the superpowered people are evil for specific reasons, and we have to kind of deal with it. So I respect that and I really do like it. But given this world and this setting, this world building, this magic system he creates and everything, I would have loved it if he would have gone much deeper and much more cerebral with it. It could have been a lot of fun. So one of the other main characters in the story is the leader of the Reckoners, or Dr. Jonathan Phaedrus, or whatever. He goes by Prof, but he's, got a doctorate degree. He's a very advanced engineer and stuff, and he's the head of the Reckoners. Like he tries to imply that he's the head of this cell, but I'm pretty sure he's the head of all of it. And he is like their tech builder. He's an engineer and stuff. So they have this special equipment. They have this device called tensors, which allows them to disintegrate and burrow through like inanimate objects. Because Steelheart basically turned the entire city into metal. So most people live underground, so they can use these objects to these weapons to tunnel through and find different places and stuff like that. So it's really interesting. And they also have other tech that is clearly derived from superpowers, like the tensors, the disintegration glove thing is very clearly derived from somebody's superpower. They also have these, I think their jackets have shields in it, which is similarly derived from a superpower, and they have like extra healing, like advanced healing tech and stuff too. So, based on my knowledge of stuff like Stormlight and Mistborn, like the idea of having Fabrials in this world that's not in the Cosmere is really cool. Like it's Fabrials by a different method, but they're just totally Magitech. It's just superpower Magitech, really. So it's really cool. I dig that aspect about it a lot. And along with this interesting level of Magitech, Brandon has a kind of what I feel almost contradictory nature of their powers. When in most superhero series that I'm familiar with, along with comics and different things, the person with the abilities, or if they have multiple abilities, those powers will all be related to each other. It'll be like, telepathy and telekinesis, or like super strength and durability, that kind of thing, versus something like shoot, like Death Point, being able to like shoot, like disintegrate people with a point, and being able to talk to animals. Like Brandon kind of goes in that direction. Two powers or three powers that are very contradictory, and you just kind of give them to the same person. So it's almost no rhyme or reason, and there's no pattern, which I think is done specifically to make it that much more difficult for anybody to assume their weaknesses. Because most people will probably assume that the weaknesses are related to the powers, but their powers are so contradictory, and there's almost no rhyme or reason that you can't even use that as a basis to try to figure it out. So I thought that was also a really cool detail he added to it. So my favorite characters are definitely David and Doctor or Prof. I'm just calling him the Prof. And this other character Megan, who's David's love interest. Those are the main characters we get like a lot of development, a lot of depth for. The rest of the crew, they're just kind of there. They get quips and one lines. We learn a little bit about them, but they're clearly going to be saved for later books. So those three are our main that we really focus on, and of course Steelheart and the world itself. So I really enjoy it from that perspective. The story is, I guess I would call it kind of thin, but it's Brandon Sanderson, so the writing style is very intriguing and engaging, and the magic in the world is always going to be interesting because that's just the stuff he's really, really good at. So it's not even that much of a surprise to say that that stuff turns out really well. But if you're not into young adult fiction and you feel like you need something with more gravitas, more depth and nuance and like bigger stakes and stuff, then you'll probably get bored with this series fairly quickly. But I really like superpowered stuff. I really like superhero based fantasy fiction genre stuff. So this really got me and I really dug it a lot. So I definitely want to continue on with it. So, before we jump into spoilers, for anyone that's going to bow out before we go into spoiler section, let me ask you, leave a comment in the comment section below. Let me know what's your favorite Brandon Sanderson non-Cosmere work. So let me know about that in the comments down below, and we're going to jump over to spoilers. So if you've read it, join us over there. If you haven't, hang back until you have. So, with that being said, spoilers for Steelheart, Book 1 in the Reckoner series by Brandon Sanderson. So, the main thing I really want to talk about in spoilers is the reveals that happen at the end. So we learn that Prof is an epic, and we learn that the tensor, the disintegration glove, and the shields that they have, and the I keep calling it hamstring. I don't think that's right. Their healing device is all derived from Prof's powers. He has the ability to create indestructible shields, and he can disintegrate inanimate objects, anything that's non-living, and he has super advanced healing and stuff. So like those powers don't really relate to each other, but I think that's an awesome power set to have, because even though he can't like fly, he's not truly invulnerable. His shields gives him the ability to fly by basically standing on a disc and hovering around or whatever. And his shields are powerful enough, and he has such control over them that he's functionally invulnerable because he can cover any part of his body at will and stuff. And his level of healing. So like if he gets hurt anyway, he can still heal anyway. So he's a legit formidable person. So the whole idea of him using his powers through technology and not using his powers actively being what kept his evil nature like tamped down and stuff, because that's the whole thing. The more an epic uses their power, the more they become evil. So him not using his power kind of kept him from going crazy and like allowed him to stay fairly normal and stuff. So I thought that was really cool, and just that reveal of it, I was so like, I kind of suspected it because I'm like, y'all either are working with epics or somebody is an epic, because this tech clearly is derived from somebody's powers. So there has to be, there has to be a source to it. So it was, and that was, I guess, that's kind of a predictability thing about the story. But it's, the story's kind of thin, so it's fairly easy to see through it. But another reveal, we learn also that Megan is an epic. She was actually one of Steelheart's lieutenants firefight. And the way in which that's all revealed is interesting. Like, her powers are also interesting. Like, she's an illusion caster who can reincarnate. Like, that's just interesting in and of itself to me. To have a character who like has no real invulnerability or like strength powers, but it seems like all these epics have a way of cheating death in some kind of way. All their powers work differently, but they all have some sort of way of cheating death to a degree. So like, she reincarnates versus having shields or being invulnerable or just straight up immortal. But when she does reincarnate, she loses memories from the previous life or whatever. And there's actually more that we come to learn about her powers later, and it's actually like, wow. That's the best part of the entire story, is the depth of her powers and all the implications that it has for later. This entire series is very much a world building magic system exploration for me, because the stuff that Brandon does with it just makes it all worthwhile. And the last thing I want to talk about before I wrap up this review is the final reveal. The whole thing throughout the entire story, everyone's trying to figure out what Steelheart's weakness is. They're wondering if it was the gun that that David's dad used, or if it was the fact that David's dad believed in good epics. Like, could that have been a weakness? Because their weaknesses can be very random things. So there's just all this stuff they're trying to figure out, and they tried all these different ways, all their ideas that they had at the end. They tried it and it didn't work, and then it becomes basically apparent that Steelheart's weakness is he can only be harmed by someone who doesn't fear him. And his dad, David's dad, was able to hurt him because he thought Steelheart was a good epic at that moment, so he didn't fear him. And he was taking a shot at death point, so he wasn't even thinking about Steelheart. So that's why it was able to hurt him. And but they're in a situation now where Steelheart's power has been so completely solidified that it's hard to find anybody that's not afraid of him. But the way David's plan worked is that he rigged a gun that would misfire like catastrophically, and because he knows that Steelheart's special move is to use someone else's gun against them, he puts them in a situation where he takes David's gun and is about to kill David with it, but the gun backfires catastrophically and kills Steelheart because, of course, he's not afraid of himself. So it like explodes, all the shrapnel goes through his head and kills him and stuff. So I thought that was a really clever way to do it, like versus having to just say, oh, knowing his weakness makes me not afraid of him, so that's why I was at, something like that, just some kind of cop-out way of doing it. I'm really happy Brandon didn't do that. And at this point, I would have come to expect him to do, nothing less than what he did, because, as I said, like, I praise Brandon on his channel. He's like the top level of my favorite authors right now. He's just great. So it's no surprise. Even this is older Brandon went before he got, master level. So, and it's still good. So I definitely recommend it. So have you all read the first book in the Reckoner series, Steelheart? If you have, let me know what your favorite part was in the comments down below. Or if you haven't, let me know what's your favorite Brandon Sanderson non-Cosmere stuff. So let's talk about it in the comments. So as always, remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will talk to you all next time. Peace.